Creating a dimensional grid for your typographic layout is all about achieving the idea of three-dimensional structure and perspective. Now to do this, we can start off and I can show you a few techniques in Illustrator, but I actually prefer to do this kind of work in Adobe Photoshop simply because it gives me the most control. But since we've done other things in Illustrator, let me show you how you can do this in this particular software. First off, before we jump in, I'm very much aware that there is a perspective grid tool. And with this tool, it gives you the ability to set a horizon line and establish a grid that you can then draw and place information or place your graphics onto and move them around three-dimensionally. I don't prefer using this simply because it's a little bit cumbersome and there's a much easier way to achieve a three-dimensional type form. So I'm going to get rid of that. Instead, as we've done with our other techniques, first type out what you want and establish your hierarchy. Make sure your most important text is large and most noticeable. You've got subheads that are secondary and everything else falls underneath that. If I wanted to do something like put the movie title into perspective, here's how I would do it. If you've got text, we need to break this apart into their individual vector points and layout. So with it selected, I'm going to go up to Type and choose Create Outlines. This will remove the text elements and just give you your vector outline of all the shapes of your letters. Once that's done, I can select my letters, and I like to use the free transform tool. Now when you select this tool, it's going to give you a bunch of different sub-tools that you can pick and choose from. The very one on the bottom, the free distort, will allow you to click on any of the edges and distort them and move them into perspective. And you can put this into 3-point perspective, 2-point perspective, whatever you want to follow that particular vanishing point. So in this case, if I wanted to put my movie title in looks like a little 1-point perspective vanishing point that goes off that way, it's easy enough to do that, and now I've got it already set up. The other thing to consider is once you've got your vanishing point established for one thing, you may want to establish it for other things as well. So to do this, I'm going to grab my line segment tool and I'm simply going to draw off a line at the top and bottom of this so that I know where they intersect. Notice that I let it follow along the edge of my title, and here I can see where they intersect. So this is my vanishing point for here. With those lines now selected, I can go up to View and down to Guides, and I can choose Make Guide. If they're turned on, I should be able to see them. Whoops, looks like I still had my other guides turned on from last time. At any point in time, you can always unlock your guides, and you can select any other guides and you can clear those away if those are getting in your way. And that's what they were doing for me too. Let's go back up to View, and I'm going to go down to Guides and lock my guides down. Now if I wanted to put the subtitle in perspective too, no matter where I have it, I can return back up to Type, choose Create Outlines, and then choose my free distort and transform this. As long as it stays fitting into that vanishing point up there, doesn't matter where I place it or how I have it, it should still be nice and readable and follow that three-dimensional plane or that particular perspective from here. So that's how you can do vector graphics into perspective. This works for anything that you have, and so you would set it up and have it follow along a particular grid path. This works really well if you have a photograph that's already got some perspective to it, but it doesn't have to work that way. The other ways we can do it is to jump into Adobe Photoshop and use some of Photoshop's tools to establish your grid perspective as well. Now when you work in Photoshop, it's all about working in layers. So I want to make sure I have my layers panel open so I can see it as I work. Since I've already got my text typed out on this document, I'm going to go ahead and just copy it over and use it as I see fit. So I'm going to copy that text, jump back into Photoshop and paste it. And when I bring it in, I'm going to bring it in simply as pixels. Now if you need to, you can bring it in as a vector smart object, but I think pixels will do for what we're trying to do. We'll place it here and scale it up as necessary. Hit return to lock in your transformation. Now, We can do the same kind of distortion transformation with our movie title and subtitle as we did in Illustrator. If you go up to Edit and down to Transform, notice that there is a perspective and a distort. However, don't do that just yet. If I was to distort this already and create this, when I hit return, it's going to transform my title, but if I need to go back and make a change, well, I can't do that. It's going to lock in that particular change. So before you do any kind of editing to here, once you bring in your text, let's convert this layer to a Smart Object layer. To do that, you can right-click or control-click on it and choose Convert to Smart Object. Notice now it has the little Smart Object symbol. With that done, now when I go up to Edit, down to Transform, again, I like to use the distort rather than the perspective. This will allow me to make a change to it. I can put this into whatever perspective that I want. And when I hit return and lock it in, it looks good. But now if I need to make a change, I can go back up to Transform and I can distort it, and it remembers the original that I have. So it's much easier to do this. So the magic trick to this is to make sure to turn on your Smart Object layer or convert a layer to a Smart Object before you do any kind of distortion. While we're in Photoshop, another great way to add a subtle idea of depth is by simply adding a drop shadow or a cast shadow to your design. Let's do that for our subheads down here. Actually, let's go and paste these in here as pixels. And again, once I bring them in, I'm going to convert them to a Smart Object just so I can always transform and bring this layer back to where it needs to be. To add a drop shadow in Photoshop, simply select the layer you want, and at the very bottom you can click on the Effects panel and choose Drop Shadow. Now when doing this, make sure Preview is turned on your layer styles and you've got Drop Shadow the word highlighted. Play around with the placement, the distance, the size and spread of your shadow, and this will give you a different kind of look and feel for this. Now this is very simple and easy enough to be able to do. This is probably one of the first things that you learned how to do whenever you play around with Photoshop. The deal with using these kind of shadows is they work really well to get some contrast between the foreground and the background. So especially if you've got light text, it's a great way of darkening up the background. But especially if you play around with the distance of it, you can really force the perspective and let it go much, much farther. Playing around with the angle, we'll draw it off or drop it down to a different angle and really make it look like it's shining through and placed on top of your design. Instead of doing a drop shadow, another thing you can do is a cast shadow. Now with the cast shadow, let's see if I can get the title of it on here a little bit larger. So I'm going to bring my movie title back onto here, copy that, now I'll get rid of these two. Again, we'll paste it in as pixels, we'll scale it up, and I'll convert this layer to a Smart Object. To give yourself a cast shadow, that's all about connecting your shadow to one particular part of your design and letting it fall down or cast the rest of the way. I'm going to make a copy of this layer, layer 3. This copy, I'm then going to put below my movie layer. So right now I've got two different movie titles, one on top of the other. I'm going to turn off this one just to work on my copy layer. This copy is going to be my shadow. In order to make it look a little bit less transparent, we're simply going to drop the opacity of this layer down. That looks good. And to distort it, we can go up to go up to Edit, Transform, and we can distort it. We want it to be able to lay down and off to the side, but still keeping that bottom edge lined up. So all I'm going to do is push it down and across this way and turn it on. Now when I turn on layer 3, it looks like it's got a cast shadow effect to it. Again, a great simple trick to add some cast shadows to what you have. To take it a little bit farther, if I wanted this shadow to get lighter as it goes out, This is maybe where I would either add a gradient overlay, or even better, I could do a layer mask. To do a layer mask, I'm going to select my layer that has my shadow, and I'm going to turn on layer mask down at the very bottom center. This is going to add another little icon. Whenever we paint inside of this particular selected icon, anything that's black is going to mask out or erase it away. So I'm going to use my paintbrush tool. I'm going to set my paintbrush to be a little bit larger and have a hardness of 0. So you want to have a very soft, rounded edge brush. Let's make it a little bit larger. The larger it is, the easier this will be to blend. Do make sure your mode is set to normal and your opacity for now can be set to 100%, though you can change that around later. Now when I click and drag and paint over this area, do make sure your fill color is set to black. So I want my foreground color to be black. Wherever I paint black, it's going to erase away that particular top part of the title. Now if you go too far, you can swap back over to white as your foreground color, and you can bring it back. And you can swap back and forth, erasing away. You can also play around with changing your opacity and dropping it down to give you a little bit more control. A lot of these techniques are covered in my illustration class. Now when I turn back on my text, it gives it a little bit more truer feel for a cast shadow. Again, Photoshop gives you this flexibility. It is possible to do this in Illustrator. It just takes a little bit of extra effort. This is why I like to use Photoshop, because I can flow really nicely and really quickly. The last thing to remember whenever working with a layer mask is to select your layer again so that you're not accidentally working on the mask. So this is a final third technique that I would like to see you use within your poster for this week.